The Ghosts of Greyfriars. It shouldn't be surprising that Edinburgh, Scotland is full of ghosts, for it is an old city, and perhaps the most haunted spot in Edinburgh is Greyfriars Kirkyard, nestled below the great hill on which sits Edinburgh Castle. Now, kirk is a Scottish word for church, so the kirkyard is simply a churchyard with a typical churchyard cemetery. This cemetery may be best known for the nearby statue of Greyfriars Bobby, a Skye Terrier named Bobby who, after his master died and was buried in Greyfriars in the late 1800s, is said to have spent the last 14 years of his life loyally guarding the grave. Of course, the wee dog might have stayed in the kirkyard, in part because people kept feeding him. And there are rumours that when Bobby died, a look-alike terrier was brought to the cemetery, just to keep the story going. Greyfriars is old. Burials have been taking place there since the 1560s. And though it appears to be built on a hill, historical records report that it was originally a valley 20 feet or more below the surrounding area. Such is an effect of some 500,000 recorded burials over the centuries, one on top of another. It has such a concentration of human remains that during rainy periods it's not uncommon for a stray femur or phalange to rise up to the surface. It has monuments through the centuries featuring carved skulls, weeping angels, don't blink, likenesses of the dead. Some graves are surrounded by thick iron cages called mort safes. You see, in the late 1700s and early 1800s, Edinburgh was a centre of medical research. But cadavers were hard to come by. Medical lecturers would pay good money for a body and ask few questions. So the mort safes were to deter grave robbers, or resurrectionists as they were known. Much of the ghostly activity in Greyfriars Kirkyard centres on the mausoleum of Sir George Mackenzie, known as Bloody Mackenzie. This Mackenzie was a judge in the late 1600s. Now that was a time when Scotland and England shared a king and were moving toward union. At that time, the Presbyterians of Scotland were resisting efforts to make their church more like English Anglicanism. The issues at debate included the liturgy and especially whether the king should be considered head of the church as the Anglicans believed, or not as the Presbyterians believed. In reaction to the pressure, Scottish Presbyterians signed a covenant at a large gathering in Greyfriars Kirkyard in 1638. The Covenanters, as they were called, swore by oath to reject all innovations in religious observance, while still professing political loyalty to the king. But that wasn't good enough for the English. Things came to a head in 1679 when these Covenanters rose up in rebellion. The English army quickly quashed the rebellion, and hundreds of rebel prisoners were marched to Edinburgh under Judge Mackenzie's jurisdiction. They were held at Greyfriars Kirkyard in what amounted to little more than an animal pen, the world's first concentration camp. Hundreds of them died over that winter of exposure and disease. The leaders were beheaded and their heads displayed in various public squares. And that's just some of it. In all, Bloody Mackenzie hunted down and killed an estimated 18,000 Covenanters. A dozen years later, Mackenzie himself died and was laid to rest in Greyfriars in a fine family mausoleum, a circular grey stone building topped with a dome. The ground entrance room is empty, and a narrow flight of spiral stairs winds down to where the coffins of Mackenzie and relatives lay. Then several decades later, a man named John Hayes, a criminal fleeing the police, hid out in the Mackenzie mausoleum. For 6 long months Hayes secreted himself within the vault, coming out only to steal food and drink. When the local police eventually caught up with him, they found him a raving madman, insisting that the coffins in the mausoleum would move at night of their own accord, and that Bloody Mackenzie himself could be heard shuffling and scraping within his wooden box, having been so evil in life that his corporeal remains could find no peace in death. And that was a story for more than 200 years. But then, in just 1998, the mausoleum was again broken into, this time by a homeless man just wanting to get out of the cold Edinburgh rain. Despite the vault being pitch black, the vagrant decided to explore. He found the stairs going down, removed an iron grate covering it, and descended the narrow spiral stones to the burial chamber. Perhaps looking for valuables to steal, he began to smash open the caskets, when suddenly a hole opened up in the old wooden floor beneath his feet, and he fell through to a previously unknown third chamber. Now this was a pit full of rotting corpses. They most likely had been dumped in by the cartload centuries before during a plague. Up till then the pit had been well sealed, so the corpses were not just skeletal. They had rotting flesh and ooze covering sunken features, ragged clothing, matted hair, and an overpowering stench. Shrieking in terror, the man scrambled out of the pit, shot up the stairs and out into the courtyard, apparently deciding that the rain was preferable to corpses. He was running through the cemetery, screaming, covered in blood and slime. A watchman saw him and ran off screaming himself in another direction. Ever since that night in 1998, the mausoleum has been the scene of strange phenomena. The very next day, a local woman walking past the mausoleum noticed that it had been broken into. She peeked inside, only to be blown off her feet by a cold wind from the inside. Loud noises sometimes emanate from it at night, laughing, growling, the sound of a heavy wooden object being dragged over stone. One day a woman was found unconscious nearby, her neck covered in bruises, though she never saw her assailant. Many people standing nearby find spots where it is inexplicably much colder or feel cold breezes coming from nowhere. People have had their fingers broken, their hair pulled, and felt as though something had punched or kicked them. There have been more than 450 reported attacks since 1998. What is it? The ghost of a plague victim, or a covenanter, or Bloody Mackenzie himself? Could it be caused by electromagnetism from nearby high-voltage equipment? Or is it just human imagination and superstition? Who knows? But if you go to Edinburgh, you can take a ghost tour that goes through the kirkyard and even peeks into Bloody Mackenzie's mausoleum. That is, if you dare. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers and patrons. See you next week. Bye bye.